All right, before we get into Microsoft Access 2007, get familiar with the environment, and start creating, we need to cover some database concepts. So let's talk about a database and exactly what it is. In its simplest terms, a database is an organized collection of information, and we use organized collections of information every day. Take, for example, a telephone book, or a recipe book, or even a mailing list. Now, in Microsoft Access, a database is a little bit more than that. Yes, it is a set of data related to specific purposes or topics, but it also includes tools that you need to work with that data, such as tools for sorting and extracting data, or even summarizing it in a nice little report. Another piece of terminology you need to be familiar with when working in Microsoft Access is a table. Now, a table is just a list of related information that's sorted into columns and rows. Now, each row in the table would be called a record. Think of the phone book, and your particular information in that phone book would be considered a record. Each column in the table would be called a category, or in our case, a field. Now, a column of phone numbers in that phone book would be considered the phone number field, for example. Now, your actual phone number in the phone book is one item of data, and we call that a data value. Now let's talk about relational database concepts, because when we work with Microsoft Access, we're creating what we call a relational database. And a relational database is not a flat file database like a phone book or even a spreadsheet, for example. Just think of a mail order DVD club for a minute and take a look at this first table here where we've got the name of the person placing the order. We've got their information like address, city, state, zip. Then we've got an order number for their order, the date it was ordered, there's the DVD title and the price. Now, what if a customer orders more than one DVD? Well, as a business, we hope that would happen. But what then happens in a flat file like this is we get multiple records containing duplicate information. So take a look at this table now where we see David Rivers 4 times. The address is repeated 4 times, so is the city, state, and zip. The order numbers change, but down here you can see that we've got the same order number because the same DVD was ordered twice, maybe one for oneself and one as a gift. So here we've got a very inefficient design. In Microsoft Access, when we talk about relational databases, we mean multiple tables, and each table will pertain to a specific topic. So look at this example here, where we've got all the customers and their information in one table, separate from all of the orders that go into their own table. And then we've got a DVD inventory table here that has all the DVD titles and their prices. All we need to do now is simply add some fields to each of these tables that will contain data that uniquely identifies each record. And when we talk about a unique identifier, we're talking about the primary key field. Now, the primary key is a field containing unique data values to identify each record in a table. So if you look down here at the customers table, we've added the customer ID field. Over here, we've got the order number field. And in the DVD inventory, each DVD will get an ID that is unique. So in other words, we will not have 2 customer IDs in the customer tables that are the same. In the orders table, each order will have its own unique number. And same thing for the DVD inventory table, where each DVD has its own unique identifier. So because each of these tables is linked by a common field, and you can see going from customers over to orders, we've got the customer ID field in here. And then from the DVD inventory table, we've got the DVD ID showing up in the orders table as well. This makes them related, or what we call a relational database. Now, relationships need to be explained a little bit too, because each relationship will consist of a primary table, sometimes called the parent, and a related table that we often call the child. The primary table usually contains the primary key field. So over here, we've got customers table with the customer ID as the primary key. And over here in the orders table, you see customer ID does show up, but it's not a primary key. And that means that this customer ID can show up many times in the orders table. That's exactly what we want. We want the same customer placing many orders. Now, when we talk about relationships, that's how tables are related, there's another key concept you need to understand. Typical relationships include one-to-one and one-to-many. Those are the 2 main types of relationships. A one-to-one relationship exists when the primary record has only one related record in that child or related table. So here you can see we've got customer information and their address, and then we've got a billing table, for example, where a billing address would show up for each customer, and they're only allowed one billing address. So you can see we've got the primary key here showing up in both tables. Now, the one-to-many relationship is actually the most related records in the related table. So here you can see where we've got customers listed in our customers table. The customer ID exists only once in this table, and that's because customer ID is the primary key, but we do see that same customer ID repeated many times in the orders table as the customer places each order. Notice also that the customer ID here is not a primary key, not in the orders table. So now we need to understand something called normalization. We need to be able to organize our data into smaller tables. That's part of normalization. And the reason we do that is to prevent redundant data. We saw that earlier where name and addresses and so on were repeated throughout a table. By separating them into separate tables, we avoid that redundancy. That improves our manageability of our database, improves the speed and efficiency that we can work with the data, and then it makes creating or designing queries, forms, and reports that much easier. You'll see this when we get into Microsoft Access. So the things we need to do in normalization is determine how many tables we're going to need, determine what fields we're going to need, and then focus in on that primary key. There's actually 5 forms of normalization, but we're going to talk about the main 3 that usually allow us to achieve normalization. Database design theory includes standards and guidelines, and they're called normal forms to help us create a normalized database. So once the primary keys are determined, normalization can start to take effect. There are 5 normal forms, like I mentioned, and they have to be created in order or performed in order, but most databases, like I said, achieve normalization after the 3rd normal form. So that's what we're going to focus on, normal forms 1 through 3. So normal form 1 here is where we break each field down to its smallest meaningful value. You can see in this table here where I've got a customer ID, I've got names, addresses, etc. Well, in the name field, I've got a first and a last name. In the address, I've got the street, the city, the state. This is the same information in a table that's been broken down into those smallest meaningful values in separate fields. Here you can see I've got a first name and a last name. The address has the street address, the city, the state, zip. And look down here where we've got family members. We've got separate fields for spouse, child 1 and child 2. One of these records has blank fields. So here's someone with no dependents. So we'll keep that in mind as we move into the next step in normal form 1. We want to remove repeating groups of data and create a separate table for each set of the related data. So those dependents, for example, if we separate them from one table into their own table, you can see we can just refer to the customer ID and keep track of their dependents. For example, this person here, customer ID 433, Dave Rivers, was to add a new dependent. There wouldn't be room in the original table, but over here in this table, we simply add another record, 433, and the name of the dependent. It also means that we don't have any blanks like we saw in the previous table. So that's the next step in normalization. Then we get to normal form 2. And here's where we create new tables for data that applies to more than one record in a table. And we add a related field, that's called the foreign key, to the new table. So here's that example again where we've got customers. And then over here, you can see they belong to a store, and the stores each have their own ID. So all we need to do is put in a store ID. Normal form 3 is where we remove fields that do not relate to or provide a fact about the primary key. So in a table, you look at that primary key. If you see fields that don't actually relate to the primary key, you can put them off in their own tables and link those tables through a common field. So take a look at this example here where we've got customers, and then the store code is in the stores table. And there's the link from store code here to store code over here. And then dependents, we saw that in the earlier example where the customer ID is related to its various dependents. So here you can see the types of relationships we're talking about. In the customers table, customer ID is the primary key, so it will always be unique. That means we've got a one-to-many relationship. In the dependents table, we'll see that customer ID repeated many times for every order, for example, or for each dependent as they're added. Also down here you can see stores. The store code is going to exist once only in the stores table, but we'll see the stores codes showing up with the various customers repeated many times in the customers table. So there's the one-to-many relationship. So the one and then the infinity symbol represents the many. All right, let's talk about a real-life scenario that we're going to use as we go into Microsoft Access and use some of these concepts and create our own database or relational database. Let's say we currently own several albums on CD, tape, and vinyl, and we want to get those organized so it's easy to find songs or albums. We also want to be able to search by media, genre, the artist, the year or the decade, and maybe apply a ranking that we can use to look up songs and albums. Maybe we want to be able to search for albums based on a star rating as well, so our favorite albums. And we want to be able to add new albums, of course, at any time as we acquire new CDs, tapes, etc. So that's what we're going to do in Microsoft Access. Let's move on to launching the actual program.